first of all.
Okay, and we're live. We want to welcome everybody to Layer 7's first Tech Talk. I'm with our Chief Architect, Francois Lascelles, and today we're going to talk OAuth. So we're live streaming, but we're also recording the event, so we'll have it up on the website at some point. And so we're just going to talk OAuth. We're going to take your questions through the feed, through Facebook, and through Twitter. So Francois, if you wanted to just maybe introduce OAuth and some of the things that are happening in the industry with OAuth and what's on the mind of the devs.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. So yeah, just like Steve was saying, this is a live chat, and this is not scripted, and it's fully open. So we hope to hear from you guys. I noticed some people are starting to check in, which is great. Yeah, I mean, just a few minutes ago, I was just across in the other meeting room, and we're talking about OAuth, and it seems like every conversation that we have these days is about OAuth. People are asking questions like, how does the OAuth, how do I implement OAuth in a way that integrates with my Active Directory, or how do I implement OAuth in a way that leverages maybe an XAML infrastructure and things like that. And I think what's going on is that the enterprise is right now there's an explosion of API drivers in the enterprise. The enterprise is trying to reach out to subscribers, is trying to reach out to consumers through mobile applications, for example. And guess what? These mobile applications consume APIs, so there's a huge demand for API management in the enterprise. And doing access control for these APIs is using OAuth. That's the standard today. And also, another driver for API management in the enterprise that we're seeing is just integration in general. People do B2B now is increasingly looking RESTful. People do integration with the cloud, which is obviously very RESTful. And again, when you do access control for that, the standard that is applicable is OAuth. So today is about OAuth best practice, and hopefully we're going to get some questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind people too that we've got a hashtag if you're on Twitter. So be sure it's #Layer7Live.
Mm-hmm.
And just a reminder to encourage people to ask lots of questions. And we're totally interactive, and Francois is here to answer any questions you have about OAuth.
And this is, I think there might be a little bit of a delay. So if you're asking a question and it seems to be taking a few minutes for me to answer, I think it's because there's a little bit of a delay between the stream and the chat here. So
yeah, and if you're having some trouble navigating, you should just simply go to the Facebook page, and if you can hear me, you're there. There's a red button that says check in and chat. Click that, and you should be able to just feed your questions in right there.
I hope people can hear us. Maybe you can, if somebody can chat in something to acknowledge that we're live, you guys can hear us, and hopefully you have questions. We can get something going soon.
So we've got a question coming in through the feed. When will OAuth become a standard?
When will OAuth become standard? Oh, thanks, Dimitri. Well, I think what defines a standard really? I mean, to me, a standard is it what people are using right now? And I think you could argue that OAuth is already a standard. Certainly OAuth 1.0 has been used already by a lot of social web type of services, but people are using OAuth in the enterprise right now. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a standard. People are using OAuth in the enterprise right now. They're using OAuth 1. They're starting to use OAuth 2, even though technically it's still a draft. If you look, for example, at Salesforce.com, they haven't waited for OAuth 2 draft to be officially becoming a standard. I mean, it's being used right now, and so as far as I'm concerned, it's a standard.
Did it replace an earlier standard, or is it a whole new way to authenticate?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, OAuth evolved as a way to do access control that's RESTful, right? OAuth is very resource oriented. OAuth talks about protecting resources. It's very focused on resource, and therefore it's very relevant to REST.
Okay.
So using OAuth, it fits really well. Things, for example, like mobile applications that need a lightweight type token to propagate that authentication.
And here comes another question. So if you're developing an API for B2B purposes,
Yeah.
there's no users involved, the transactions are machine-to-machine type calls, what should I use to do access control for this type of API?
Let me see there. So, yeah, no, that's a good one. So people see a natural fit, for using OAuth when they have an application like a mobile application that consumes an API and they want to have the subscriber register or involved in that handshake. But when you're using B2B, you don't necessarily have a subscriber, and people are wondering if OAuth is still applicable then. And I think the answer is yes. So OAuth 2 has all these different handshakes. They're called grant types, and you can pick and choose the grant type that applies to the situation that's in place. So for example, if you have a B2B type application, there's no subscriber involved, maybe you're using the client grants grant type, and that's very applicable. So yeah, there's more coming in. What's the difference between SAML and OAuth? Do I use them together? Yeah, Dimitri, so SAML and OAuth can be used together. So the way that OAuth works, it specifies, the standard is about how you go through the handshake in order to get a token which you then use to consume an API. But the OAuth specification doesn't get into details of that, how you actually do that authentication. And there's actually an extension grant type called a SAML bearer grant type, which you can use during an OAuth handshake to exchange a SAML assertion for an OAuth access token. So that's how you would use SAML together with OAuth. And when people talk about SAML and OAuth together, I think it's important to, it's very tempting for people to draw a parallel between OAuth and federation, because OAuth has this supports this three-party authorization situation. That doesn't mean that OAuth is about federation. When you use SAML, you're using SAML in a way that, most people in the enterprise would use SAML in a way that, you've got a trusted SAML issuer that authenticated somebody, and on the receiving end, I trust that issuing authority. So I don't necessarily have a way to authenticate that user, but I do trust a SAML issuer, and that's why it becomes identity federation. But with OAuth, it's not the case. With OAuth, you're just issuing a token. It's not about an inability, if you want, to authenticate somebody. Mention Salesforce. Are they the biggest OAuth user out there? I don't think so. I think that Twitter uses OAuth, and Twitter, I think, is one of the busiest. Well, I think Twitter is 8 billion API calls per month. 8 billion. So if you think about it, that must be, if not the biggest, definitely one of the biggest OAuth implementation out there. Sure.
I've got another question just came in from Simon Norris, all the way from Welwyn Garden City.
Oh yeah, I see it.
From the UK.
Simon, thanks so much for dialing in, Simon. Hi guys, are you planning to develop a toolkit for the whole OpenID Connect spec eventually, or are you just sticking to OAuth? So OpenID Connect is definitely something that is on our radar, something that we're expecting is going to come up in the enterprise right now. So, what's most important to us is to implement the standards that the enterprise is looking for to protect their API. So today, I would say that this is OAuth, but OpenID Connect is starting to creep up in there. So yeah, it's definitely on our radar, and stay tuned for that. If you do have specific requirements for using OpenID Connect in a specific enterprise situation, we want to hear from you. So send us an email.
Okay.
Thanks for your question, Simon. I hope that answers your question. What else is coming?
So we've got another one here. Quick question: how does authentication work with OAuth?
So
that's maybe a big question.
Yeah. So OAuth is really about going through a handshake to get a token, and then using that token to consume an API. But
what's a handshake?
So a handshake, the OAuth talks about a grant type. So what is the process through which the application obtains that token, and in some cases OAuth, in a three-party situation, in some cases it will involve a subscriber to grant this permission if you want. So that's the handshake part of it. But OAuth doesn't go into the details of how the subscriber is authenticated. And so that's left to the implementation. So you could use, for example, HTTP basic over SSL. I think what's important about the way that you choose to authenticate a user when you do an OAuth handshake is to really focus on the subscriber, the user experience. You want to maintain any existing sessions that are in place. For example, if I'm a subscriber, I'm using a service, I have a session in my browser in place with that provider. If I'm redirected by another application to grant access to for that application to consume an API on my behalf, I want that existing session to be recognized. I don't actually want to be prompted for credentials. So it's important to maintain that user experience. If there's anything that's SSO in place, you need to leverage that as part of the OAuth handshake. Dimitri's got another question here. Is there a difference between OAuth used for mobile and cloud? For mobile and cloud. So I guess if you're in a situation where you're exposing an API at the perimeter and you've got a requester that either comes in from a mobile device or a cloud, I guess if there's a cloud application, the way that it would work is that you would probably have a what we call a OAuth specifies two types of clients. So there's the confidential client and there's the public client. So a mobile application would not be considered a confidential client because it would not have a way to keep its credentials confidential. And somebody could open up this mobile application and steal the credentials out of it. Whereas if you got something that's hosted like an application on the cloud that will consume an API on your behalf, that would be a confidential client. So it is different. You have the ability to assign real credentials to an OAuth client in that case, and then you have additional levels of security if you want.
Great. Another question from Jamie in San Marcos, California. So we're going all around the world.
Yeah, Jamie.
What types of tokens are supported by the OAuth specifications? What type of tokens?
So yeah, OAuth specifies two token types. There's the bearer token type, which is very analogous to just using a cookie or a session ID. During that handshake, you get it's kind of like a session ID. It's a bearer type token that you just simply need to present at runtime, and it obviously needs to be kept secret between the client and the server. But there's also the concept of a MAC token, and in that case, instead of exchanging the shared secret at runtime, you're actually using that shared secret to calculate an HMAC signature. So this is something that provides integrity without perhaps requiring SSL. So those are the two types of access token. Matt has a question. So if I use SiteMinder for web access control, is there a way I can use that in conjunction with OAuth? Yes, and that's actually something that we do today for one of our customers. And the way that it works is that if you have, as a subscriber, let's say that you have a SiteMinder SSO session in place with a provider, and you're redirected to that provider to grant access control, to grant permission for an application to consume an API on your behalf, your user agent would propagate that SiteMinder session through that cookie over to the OAuth authorization server component. And so during that handshake, the OAuth authorization server has the SiteMinder SSO cookie, and it can use that to identify the subscriber, and this avoids having to prompt a subscriber for credentials. So you can certainly use that as part of the handshake.
It's great. We've got another question from the UK. Simon asks, what are your thoughts on JWT, JSON web tokens? Do you see a need for it?
That's a very good question. Yeah, JWT is certainly a very elegant
Maybe briefly explain what that means.
Well, JSON Web Tokens specifies a way to encode an actual token, and this is very interesting because when you look at an OAuth bearer token, there's nothing in the actual access token itself, right? It's kind of like a session ID. There's no intelligence and there's no information embedded in the token itself. Rather, what happens is that during the handshake and during the life cycle of the OAuth access token, you're maintaining on the server side information associated with that OAuth token. So instead of being able to parse something out of the token itself, whereas JWT allows you to embed some information in the token itself. So, if you want, I guess, if you want to avoid having any state on the server side, something like JWT becomes useful. Is there a need for it? I don't see JWT replacing OAuth. And what I do like about OAuth is all the different grant types are there that accommodates all these different situations. I don't see as JWT being an alternative for OAuth because you still need to agree on a mechanism for that token to be issued and everything. So I think OAuth still has a role to play. And you could even probably use it together. You could probably come up with your own extension token type that would be using a JWT token type. I think that would be perfectly valid, and it'd probably be a little bit of the best of both worlds. So Simon's giving me ideas about this. What else do we got? Thanks, Simon. That was a great question. Does OAuth have a role in HTML5 WebSocket style interactions? I think that anytime that there's an API being consumed, OAuth is applicable. It's as simple as that. So if you're using HTML5 WebSocket to pull information from a user agent, from an API, I think that yes, it does make sense to use OAuth for that.
A couple more questions in the queue. We got another one from Chris. Hi guys, great chat. Thank you. Yeah, we've got almost 40 people in the chat now, so keep those questions coming. We really appreciate it.
That's cool.
I'd like to make an API. Chris's question is, I'd like to make an API available to mobile users. Should I use OAuth 1 or OAuth 2? Is there an advantage to one or the other? It's a good question.
Yes. My personal preference is OAuth 2, again, because it's richer. Some people are using OAuth 1 right now, for legacy reasons.
Right.
If you have an existing infrastructure in place, if you have existing clients that are leveraging OAuth 1, and if OAuth 1 provides, a solution to the specific pattern that you're trying to implement, then it's perfectly valid. But what happened is that, because OAuth 1 didn't define all these alternative handshake patterns, people used OAuth 1 historically in ways that went beyond the specification, if you want. So, we're helping a lot of people with OAuth 1 implementations out there, and what we're noticing is that people using OAuth 1, they each have their own, custom way of doing it, if you want. And with OAuth 2, I see less of a need for that, and things are more reusable, things are more standard. So I would say, use OAuth 2 if you can, for sure. Jamie has another question. Once I've authorized a client via OAuth, is there a way to deny access if the client's status changes? So that's a very good question, Jamie. And the OAuth protocol defines how you get a token, but you still can do an authorization check at runtime. So if you look at the life cycle of a token, so there's the original handshake, and in order to avoid having to prompt a user all the time, depending on the handshake type that you're using, there's going to be a refresh. So you can do authorization check during obviously the original handshake, but down the road, because that token can be refreshed all the time, that authorization check they did in the original handshake can be hours and days long, old. if you do that authorization check every time you do a refresh, then you get in a situation where that authorization check can be maybe minutes or seconds long. But you can still do authorization check in real time, and in order to achieve that, what you need to do obviously is maintain enough information that's associated with an OAuth session in order to be able to do that authorization check later on. So you have to find the right balance between avoiding checking authorization all the time, which sometimes in the enterprise involves communicating with external components. Maybe that involves doing a lookup in a database or a directory, and that sometimes adds latency. So you want to find the right balance between having fresh authorization checks if you want, and having good latency.
This one's from Chicago.
Chicago, I love Chicago. I was there a few weeks ago. Ruel, Mendoza, where is the Layer 7 OAuth scope information stored? So Layer 7 provides the OAuth Toolkit, which runs on our gateway. And the way that it works, Ruel, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, is that we've got our gateway technology, which will apply the OAuth standard on behalf of an API that perhaps you have on the back end in your enterprise. And during the OAuth handshake, we'll create a session, and part of that session is going to be, part of the information associated with that session is the scope. So you get a template implementation from us to do the OAuth authorization server component, which is what is used during the handshake. And then you can either check for the scope at that point, or you can modify the scope. But regardless, it's going to be attached to the session, the OAuth session, and then you have a choice to store that on the devices themselves or in an external data source. For example, it could be an external database, or it could be like a caching system. It could be like a Terracotta. It could be anything you want, really. The way that we provide this to you is that you've got a template, and then if you want to attach an additional or a different source to store that information, you can very easily attach that as part of our gateway, right? Our gateway is a little bit like an ESB. It provides it provides integration points with a lot of different components in your enterprise, so you have a lot of flexibility there.
So let's see.
How many people do we have now?
We've got just about 40, I think.
Good.
Yeah. So keep those questions coming.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can find another one here. Can you recommend an OAuth server API for .NET that supports OAuth 2.0? Can you recommend an OAuth server API for .NET that supports OAuth 2.0?
Okay. So no, I think that's actually the wrong question. Well, I don't know. I think that what we would recommend is that you should probably not implement the OAuth server-side component in .NET, because if you're doing that, to me, it probably means that you're either trying to develop your own OAuth implementation, or worse, you're probably trying to implement OAuth in the API implementation itself. And as an enterprise, you don't want to implement OAuth in the API endpoint itself. You want to delegate that as part of your API management infrastructure. That gives you the agility that you need to properly manage your APIs. Because let's say that today you maybe only have one API, and it might make sense for you to embed that access control logic in your API implementation. But down the road, you might have multiple APIs, and are you going to replicate that OAuth responsibility across all of your API implementations? I don't think that makes sense. You want to have specialized infrastructure that does that, and that's something that Layer 7 definitely can help you with. So don't do it in .NET. We'll take care of it for you. Simon got awesome questions. Are you planning to merge the data model from the OAuth Toolkit with that of the new portal? If not, we end up tracking partial client profiles in two places. Well, Simon,
That sounds like a tough question.
yeah, it sounds like you actually have our technology in your hands and you're using this actively. So I would say that our OAuth Toolkit is one component of our API management solution, and the portal is another one, right? So right now, our OAuth Toolkit would actually integrate with our portal at runtime. So I don't know that you need to merge the data model. You certainly have the flexibility to store this information anywhere that you want. By default, the API keys that are used during the OAuth handshake are stored on the gateway, perhaps not in the same table as the OAuth tokens, but you do have the flexibility to move this anywhere that you want. And I think that the token management aspect of our API management solution is definitely going to grow over time. We're going to, provide you, a very open API that allows you to manage those sessions, to be able to dynamically, provision API keys and things like that. So I'll take that as feedback, and I'm not sure about the actual implementation detail of how that data model needs to be merged, but yeah, I think that the flexibility is definitely there. Matt, is OAuth vulnerable to phishing attacks? How can it protect against that? Yes, definitely. That's one of the critics of OAuth, right? So if you think about it, a traditional OAuth handshake, the way that it works is that an application would redirect me to the OAuth authorization server along with something called a redirection URI, so that once I do express that authorization, I'm redirected back to the application with something like if you're using implicit, that would be directly the access token. So if an attacker tricks me as a subscriber, for example, by sending me an email, it tricks me to click on something which redirects me to the OAuth authorization server along with a redirection URI that is in the control of the attacker. That is a very big phishing attack vector. That's very dangerous. And the proper way to protect against that is to have the authorization server implementation only allowed to use redirection URIs that are registered. So imagine that I'm a developer of an application. I'm going to register my application to be an OAuth client for that specific API. I would pre-register a redirection URI so that an attacker would not be able to substitute it with its own. So by registering those things, especially if you're using the implicit grant type, that's where you've got the biggest risk of a phishing attack because the client is not authenticated. Chris, you mentioned the OAuth Toolkit. Does the toolkit work with other implementations of OAuth? Does it include a client-side functionality, blah, blah, blah? Yes. Yeah, so the OAuth Toolkit is, so it does OAuth 1.0, 1.0a, it does OAuth 2, and it's very flexible, right? Again, it's kind of like a template implementation that allows you to, tailor it to your own need if you want to. So it's very flexible that way. Does it include the client-side functionality? So yes, our gateway technology in general allows you to implement OAuth on the client side. So for example, we implement patterns where the gateway is going to be an OAuth broker for an external API. So you could have, for example, maybe applications in the enterprise that need to consume a cloud API, and that cloud API is OAuth enabled. Well, you can use our gateway and all of the components that come with the OAuth Toolkit in order to broker that OAuth session on behalf of your applications. Simon's got a really good question again. Do you know why refresh tokens are not supported with the implicit grant type? Yes, there's a very good reason for that. Can somebody find out where Simon works? I want to find out where this guy is. So yeah, the reason why refresh tokens are not supported with the implicit grant type is that in the implicit grant type, and it's hard to explain without a board or slides, but the implicit grant type is a kind of like the simpler cousin of the authorization code grant type. And in the implicit grant type, the application redirects the user to the OAuth authorization server, but instead of an authorization code coming back, the access token comes right back to the client. So the client itself does not interact with the OAuth authorization server, and because it doesn't interact with the OAuth authorization server, it's not authenticated. And the access token is always issued through that redirection there. That's why refresh tokens doesn't make sense for the implicit grant type. There's just no interaction between the client application and the OAuth authorization server, and there's no way to authenticate it, so that would not make sense. Dimitri asks, how do I handle token or user revocation? So token revocation is very important when you're talking about API management. And what happens is that, when you publish an API and you control access for that API using OAuth, there's potentially multiple parties that are associated with the token, if you want. So there's the application that itself uses that token to consume the API. So that's one party. There's the subscriber, which is not always there, but in certain grant types, there's a subscriber that the application acts on behalf of. And then there's the actual API provider itself. And all of these parties need to be able to control or to have some visibility on the tokens, right? So that the subscriber, imagine that I'm a subscriber, I authorize some client applications to act on my behalf of. When I click yes, I authorize this, wouldn't it be nice if I got an email confirming that? Like this is to confirm that you've authorized, I don't know, Twitter to consume the Facebook API on your behalf. And if you change your mind later on, you can click on that link below. Right? So as an API provider, you want to enable your subscribers to revoke a permission that they've previously granted. This is a very important concept. And those subscribers are not OAuth aware. They don't need to know what OAuth is about, but they understand that they've granted access for an application to consume an API on your behalf, and they want to be able to revoke that authorization down the road if they want to. So I see how a subscriber portal should contain those elements, or maybe providing revocation through those links. As an application provider, the application that consumes this API using the access token, you also want to be able to provide revocation capabilities to that application provider. Because what if I have an application on the cloud that consumes APIs on behalf of the subscribers, and I know I've been compromised, and I know that I've got thousands of tokens that are used by my cloud application. Those tokens are compromised. I want to be able to revoke those things. So through a developer portal or an application provider portal, there needs to be a way for me to revoke all of those sessions. And of course, from the provider perspective, you obviously need that capability as well. So the ability to monitor the runtime behavior access tokens, look for suspicious behavior, and being able to revoke this is extremely important for your enterprise if it's in a situation that provides an API. And I can see how it also makes sense to integrate that intelligence about your tokens needs to be integrated into your enterprise BI in general. I think that there's a lot of value there, and it's information that needs to be used.
So it looks like we've got another question coming through. Does OAuth support Windows domain security? Kerberos.
Sure. Yeah, again, like what I was saying earlier is that OAuth doesn't get into the detail of how you actually do the authentication during the handshake, but it's important to maintain that single sign-on experience if you have one in place. So if a subscriber is has a Windows domain session, then you should honor that domain session as part of the handshake. So the OAuth authorization server needs to be able to integrate with Windows domain security in such a way that it's going to be leveraged during the handshake. That's very important, and it gets back to the whole protecting that user experience of your subscribers.
Right. Keep those questions coming, everybody.
Anything from Simon?
Good questions from Simon.
Or Ruel, do you have any other questions? What about on the other feeds? Anything coming from the other feeds?
Let me just take a quick look here. We've got. Yes, you may have touched on this a little bit, but what's the difference between OAuth and OpenID? Is there a sensible use case?
Yeah, so
Or can they be combined?
Yeah, so there's OpenID and there's OpenID Connect. But if you just look at it in terms of OpenID would be something that. So OpenID, when I was talking earlier about how OAuth is not about federation, well, that's where OpenID comes in. OpenID is more about federation, and that's where the parallel makes more sense. And you can actually use OpenID together with OAuth as part of the handshake. If you want to support an OpenID-based authentication with OAuth, that's perfectly fine. So one's about authentication, the other one is about creating a session, getting a token, and things like that.
Well, it looks like you may have answered everybody's questions around OAuth. Oh, here's another one coming in from Matt.
Yeah, Matt. OAuth is popular in public configuration. Have you seen it used by companies internally? Is that coming? Yeah. So again, if you have an API and it's RESTful, and if you need to do some sort of access control, then OAuth is the way to go. Probably is the most applicable standard, and it doesn't matter if you're authenticating outside developers, outside entities, or even internal entities. That doesn't matter. You've got a choice of lots of different grant types to pick from, and there is one that's going to fit your situation. Chris, do you think using the MAC token spec is more secure than using the bearer token spec? Which spec does the toolkit support? Our OAuth toolkit supports MAC token types for both OAuth 1 and OAuth 2, as well as the bearer token type. So which is more secure is interesting, right? If you're using the MAC token type, you get integrity without needing to rely on SSL. So I guess it provides an additional security in the sense that you're never exchanging the shared secret. You're always calculating something based on it, and therefore there's something a little bit more secure about it. But if you're using SSL properly, you're fine with using bearer token. And what it comes down to in the end is you want to find the right balance between the right amount of security for your API and making it as simple as possible for the target consumers of your API to actually consume your API. So you don't want to raise your security requirements to such a high degree that you're making it too difficult for your target audience to reach out your API. You have to find the right balance. So bearer seems to be a much easier thing to implement on the client side, and therefore it gets it's very popular these days. Simon wants me to summarize the differences between OAuth 2, draft 23, and draft 25 to see me rating the spec. Simon, I think we need to have a chat later today.
Yeah, we need to get him as a guest next time.
That's right, Simon. I'm going to put you on the spot here. You know what, Simon? The last draft that I looked really carefully at was draft 23. So to be honest, I need to look at draft 25 in more details in order for me to summarize the key differences. I'm afraid that I can't do that at the top of my head right now. Riel has another question.
Oh,
Why do we need to have the gateway management service installed for Secure Span 615 before we can install the OAuth Toolkit? Is this the same for 6.2? Okay, so in 6.2, those additional components are actually built in. So you don't need to rely on the OAuth Toolkit to install those. So the management service is there on our gateway to allow for an external provisioning of the OAuth Toolkit. But in the version 6.2, there's some internal services that are built into the gateway to handle a lot of what is required by the OAuth Toolkit. And so it's actually a lot easier to install the OAuth Toolkit with version 6.2 than it was with version 6.15. So yeah, the gateway management service is not going to be required anymore in version 6.2. But you probably want to use the gateway management service for other reasons, other purposes. It's a very powerful mechanism for doing some provisioning, for doing some any remote provisioning and things like that.
I've got a question here through Twitter.
Okay.
What is the interplay between API keys and OAuth?
Right. So during an OAuth handshake, there's potentially two separate identities that are authenticated. There's the subscriber, and then there's the client application. And that's not always the case because it depends which grant type you're using. But when you're talking about an application being authenticated, that's when API keys come into play. So the subscriber identity is an identity that, as an enterprise, you probably, already manage. It's an identity provider and things like that. But your client application identity is something that's created to consume this API. Typically, it's managed as part of your API management, typically as part of a developer portal. So the client identity, the client application identity is using the API key, and the subscriber identity using your existing AIM solution. Is that me? No, we answered this one. Okay, let's give it a few more minutes.
Yeah, just any more questions, just feel free to send through the chat or through Twitter. Francois has been on the hot seat for quite a while now, so maybe we'll try to wrap things up a little bit.
Can you open the door? Let's say it's a little bit too hot.
Answer lots of questions about OAuth, and we'll be back in 2 weeks, which I think is April the 3rd. For the next talk is going to be Simplify SOAP to REST. So we hope everybody comes back and shares it through their Facebook stream and invites their friends, and we'll have another live session talking SOAP to REST. But if anybody else has any other questions, we'll just give you a couple of minutes to formulate them and send them through. Otherwise, we just want to say thanks a lot. This was the first Layer 7 Tech Talk Tuesday. Thanks, Francois.
Yeah, this will be recorded and posted afterwards, right?
Yeah, it's there'll be two ways. The live stream app on our Facebook page will actually have a recording, and then we've also got a video team here, and we're going to do a produced video, and then we'll have that up on YouTube as soon as we can.
Yeah.
So watch the Twitter feed, come back to the website, and if you need to come back, then these resources will be up as soon as possible.
And if there was a question that hasn't been answered, definitely get in touch with us, and we'll connect you with the right experts.
Just Layer7, layer7tech.com, or through Twitter @Layer7. Our Facebook page is just Facebook.com/Layer7. Contact us anyway, and Francois or any of the other architects will be happy to answer any other questions. So join us again 2 weeks time, Tech Talk Tuesday, simplifying SOAP to REST.
Awesome.
Thanks, Francois.
Yeah, high five.